Yo, give me your chips, man.
Oh, allow it. I literally
What?
just bought
I said shut up, fam.
What are you doing?
Huh? Just check your back. Oh, I was only joking with him, man.
You alright?
Yeah.
I used to work for some older guy when I was your age. Running errands, things like that. I had to be the man of the house, help my mum out.
Bye, kids. Bye.
I'm the man of my house.
Talk to me, T. What's up? How are things at home?
That's what being a man's about, dealing with stress. And you deal with stress.
Yo, it's Jim's line. We've got crack cocaine, heroin. We've got everything there, so you need to send a text. It's quick.
Do you have any idea what he has to do to get that money? The risks that are involved? Tony, you gotta wake up.
You need to stop lying. Where do you go?
Somebody needs to look after this family.
Some businesses have what they call an acceptable loss. You know what the acceptable loss for your business is? You.
Hello, welcome to this BFI At Home event. BFI At Home is an online program available on the BFI YouTube channel with a range of film and television Q&As and panel discussions updated each week. My name is Guy Lodge, I'm a film critic for Variety and The Observer, and tonight I'm joined by Henry Blake, Conrad Khan and Ashley Madekwe to talk about their film County Lines. We've got a lot to talk about, but I'm going to start with Henry, because I know you come to this film and this story from, a very interesting and unusual background because you were a youth caseworker involved with teens a lot like the character of Tyler, weren't you? What was that background? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us, Guy, and the BFI. It's lovely to be here. So alongside my filmmaking for 10, 11 years, I've been a youth worker and I've worked all around London in many, many boroughs with very vulnerable children and their parents. And up until 2015, I had never brought those two worlds, my filmmaking world and my youth work together. I kept them deliberately very separate. But in 2015, a friend of mine in the youth working world asked me to help her work with two groups in a pupil referral unit in East London. And I said yes. And the commission was for 1 year, which was very unique. And one group in particular were being trafficked, exploited and traumatized by County Lines criminal networks. And we came out the back of that year very shaken, very distressed. And at that point, fortunately, unfortunately, the instinct arose in me as a filmmaker to go, you got to settle the score now and bring these two worlds together.
It must be a challenge to make fiction what's been so kind of real for you in your life and your work. How much is the character of Tyler, for example, drawn from, people you directly counseled and worked with?
Hugely drawn. He's a sort of configuration of many, many young boys that I've worked with. Probably if I wanted to whittle it down 2 or 3, in particular 2 cases that I worked on. And that would be the same for Tony. Tony is based on 2 mothers that I worked very closely with for quite a prolonged period of time. So it's always a fine balance, but I think the clue is in your intention as to why you're making the film. And I can't stress enough that I made this film for a general audience, an audience who might not have such acute awareness of the issue and of the characters. So that guides you in your sort of editorial approach.
And Conrad, how much did you know of this world kind of going into this project?
Well, I had heard about it prior to making this film through music, in particular rap music, and even more particularly drill, which is a subgenre which glorifies county lines. And something Henry and I spoke about was this rapper called Frosty, who at the time of making this film was incarcerated for county lines offences. And his two most popular songs, County Lines 1 and County Lines 2, at the moment have millions of views on YouTube. And that was what I knew of it. And that was something that it really didn't sit right with me, the fact that these rappers were glorifying it and flouting their watches, their jewelry, their cars and that kind of thing. And I think I saw this film as an amazing opportunity to shine light on the truth of county lines.
And Ashley, this is an unusual project for you because you've been working in the US so much for the last few years, and particularly in a lot of sort of TV, that's a much kind of glossier world than this. What drew you to this project and made you want to kind of return to Britain for this story?
I've had like a yearning to be working in the British industry for a while. I miss it. And then when I came across the script for County Lines, I was just blown away. It's such an amazing script. It's just steeped in reality. Nothing is overstated. And I felt really emotionally connected to it immediately from my first read.
And I mean, the relationship that you and Conrad have on screen as Tony and Tyler is a very unusual mother-son relationship, because they're sort of equals in ways that are, you know, often quite frightening, and we don't see that on film a lot. How did you two kind of find that bond together?
Well, we had the benefit of rehearsal, which is, you know, never a given in our industry these days, and that was, I mean, it was a godsend. I couldn't have done it without it. But I also drew from my experience of my mother and watching her relationship with my brother. He wasn't involved in county lines per se, but he has definitely had an involvement in kind of being on the street, and he's been arrested numerous times. This isn't a secret, so I'm not telling anyone anything they don't know about him. And watching my mom navigate that and dealing with my brother as he became a young man in her house, but still a teenage boy. And that sometimes was scary to watch because he was physically imposing. And my mom is a small woman, and she would kind of fight to maintain being the parent in that scenario, and sometimes would fail.
Yeah,
I definitely drew from that.
I think, you know, to Henry's credit, it's one thing that distinguishes County Lines from a lot of films that sort of dabble in this world is that it, you know, Tony isn't judged in any capacity. She's not a bad mother. She's kind of doing the best she can in impossible circumstances. How do you, Henry, in your sort of script, were you concerned at any point that you were possibly exploiting sort of reality, or how did you kind of keep the balance on the side of empathy in dealing with such hard scenarios?
It's a balance. I mean, it went through a pretty rigorous, you know, development process internally with working with the producers and executive producers, and you know, there was a lot of notes, but no one, where I was bulletproof was my experience, you know, and I knew that was the ticket out of jail, if you like.
Yeah.
I wasn't worried about exploiting these characters because by nature, doing a very highly structured specific drama around it was by itself sort of extrapolating one step away. Yeah. And I think that in itself is a way of safeguarding the film from that style of exploitation and as what has come to be known poverty porn. I think that one thing that was very clear with Tony was riding that line between a woman who had no respite, who has no support, who is very much a pariah, or you get the strong sense of her being a pariah, but is still got a layer of dignity left in her. And I think the key thing there is that she loves her children.
Yeah.
That is never brought into debate, you know. And when I've worked with mothers, as difficult as sometimes they can be, because of that lack of support and because of a whole other, you know, because of other complex reasons, what was never brought into debate with my work was the love that they had for their children. And so that, I think, is a key nugget in all of this. You never feel like she doesn't love her children throughout the film.
Yeah, I agree. I saw that with my own mother when my brother was in and out of school and was also in pupil referral units. And I think my mom really struggled with communicating sometimes how much she was advocating for her son, and sometimes it was coming across in the wrong way because my mom doesn't have the best communication skills, and so she would really struggle with that. And I thought about that in that scene when Tony is at the pupil referral unit having the meeting with the teachers. I thought about my mom and how much she loved my brother, and just wanted to do what was right for him and fight for her child, and wasn't always coming across in the best way.
I think we should also give a shout out at this point to Harris Dickinson, who I think is extraordinary as Simon, and doesn't play him just as a kind of one-dimensional villain. I mean, I think there are layers of vulnerability there where you can see how he probably at one point was in Tyler's position himself. How did you kind of conceive that character, Henry?
Well, he's based on a few boys that I've worked with. Yeah. So there was no conceivement needed, you know. I've said this a number of times in interviews. I don't feel that it's useful making monsters out of these people, because whether we like it or not, they're monsters. They're people. Sorry, they're people. And especially when you're trying to write drama, I think good drama makes these worlds tangible for anyone watching it. There has to be a sort of innate connective tissue that people can feel is possible. I think bad drama isolates an audience and sort of pushes the issue away. It doesn't bring it under its nose. And so characters are so important there. But I mean, again, it comes down to the fact that I'd sat in rooms, you know, I've sat in rooms with Simons. I've worked extensively with them. I've tried to safeguard with them and against them. And, you know, I've sat in a Prue with a Simon who was 17 years old and grooming and recruiting his younger brother's friends and his younger brother, who was 11, 12 years old, in the same educational setting.
Yeah.
And there was no remorse around that.
A question for both Conrad and Ashley is, I mean, Henry obviously comes to this project with this wealth of personal investment and experience. What research did you have to do to get that level of understanding of this situation and this world?
Well, before we started filming, Henry and I had numerous sessions at the BFI cafe, and just speaking about the story and help crafting the character of Tyler together. And just in terms of preparation, I think just acquiring knowledge, Henry's knowledge, and then applying that to my own emotional backdrop. And I think the connection of those two things help create the character.
I was born and raised in South London in an environment that was not too dissimilar from the one that we were trying to create. So although myself, I wasn't involved in any drug enterprises, I definitely know and have a lot of experience in dealing with people in that world. And then Henry was just an invaluable resource for us. We had again lots of sessions where he would share his knowledge, and we also spoke a lot about different films and books and pieces of music that would help inform character decisions and kind of give us an artistic language that we could refer to when we were on set.
Yeah, I could give an example. Henry got me to watch A Streetcar Named Desire and to look at how Marlon Brando acts in the flat, and for lack of a better word, imitate or draw upon that character. Just an example.
Yeah.
As an example.
That's a great example, though, because I was going to ask you, the progression that Tyler undergoes is very subtle, because he begins the film already quite, withdrawn and quiet, but the change that we see in him over what's meant to be a 6-month period is truly frightening, because he becomes sort of dehumanized in a sense. How did you play that?
I mean, that's what you just said was hard in itself, but it was made even harder by the fact that we had such a compact shooting schedule. And sometimes I had to switch from 6 months before, 6 months after, and back and forth and so on. And it's just taking a few hours of the day to just get in the mind frame and to think about everything that's gone on, and to have that picture of what horror I've gone through in my mind for a few hours before I make the change. And another thing that helped that transition was the costume and the hair and makeup. I would spend probably 45 minutes putting prosthetic pimples and spots all over my face, and then big bags under my eyes. So that helped a little bit to become a bit more agitated.
It's obviously a dark film and a hard film to watch, but it doesn't, to me, feel like an entirely hopeless one. Do you feel that way? I think that there are kind of some positives to be drawn from this story. Did you intend that to be the case, Henry?
Yeah, of course. I think not every vulnerable child or difficult child or complex child is a hopeless case. Change is really possible, but it takes work, and it takes presence and consciousness and recognition that you need other people, your family, if you are functioning with your family, to survive. And I think that's the potency of the piece. Really, the success, the DNA of the piece is Tyler and Tony get dragged through hell, and just as they're about to be, damned to eternity, they say, do you know what, we can crawl out of this. We can. There's a gap. I've seen it, but I need you to help me get up there. And that's what's so powerful about it. And in youth work, that's the same. You might have in the morning a child who's going every way that you don't want them to go. And then in the afternoon, you might have a child who you think's going that way and then makes one positive choice and everything seems to click. It's not one size fits all.
And is your youth work ongoing kind of after making this?
Yeah, I mean, it's shifted a lot. 2015 was the sort of zenith of my really tough frontline youth work. And since that point, it has phased into another style of youth work, which is sort of trying to give young people soft skills and filmmaking and the sort of technical departments. Although last year I did a very powerful series of workshops with young people affected by homelessness. And we made a series of experimental films that were shown at the Saatchi Gallery. And hearing their lives was something else. That was on another level. So it depends on where I'm at, where the commissioning is at, because obviously all of this takes money. And but I would say 2015 was the real sort of climax, if you like, of that proper tough frontline stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously the film had a very successful premiere last year at the London Film Festival, and then COVID happened and the release was delayed, and now it's finally here. And how do you hope to get the film out to the audience that most needs to see it?
Well, there's a phased release, isn't there? We're coming out on December the 4th in select cinemas, or the ones that are open, and online. So BFI iPlayer and Curzon Home Cinema, and IFI in Ireland. Just a little plug there, folks, for the release. And then I think we will move gradually, and we're already getting interest from film societies and from colleges and schools and that. I mean, that's already starting to take traction. So once the film is out, I'm sure more of that style of release will trickle in, and word of mouth will hopefully spread.
Yeah. And Conrad, could you imagine people your age watching this film and getting learning something kind of different from it?
Definitely. I mean, at the premiere, I brought a handful of friends along, 6 or 7 of my best friends, and they really, really enjoyed it, and they said they'd never seen a film like this before. And it didn't really make a difference that I was in it or I wasn't. It still meant a lot to them. So I think it does have from what I've seen in my own experience, it definitely has the capacity to reach people of my age.
Yeah. And Ashley, I wanted to ask, having done this now, are you up for doing more kind of British indies in the future, more ones that have this kind of resonance?
Absolutely. I mean, projects like this are the dream. It's what we want to do as actors. You get invested in characters and tell stories that can have social significance and move people. Yeah, I don't think I even have the words to describe how important the experience was for me. I tried to in a note to Henry, but it meant so much to me. I would do it again in a heartbeat.
The whole visual style of the film is very distinctive, Henry, the way you've shot it in these kind of really, really kind of dark, sort of these dark greens and blues that kind of gradually sort of feel like they shift in palette with Tyler's own kind of mood and consciousness. What were your kind of inspirations for the filmmaking?
I mean, it wasn't really films, to be honest, Guy. I mean, I was very clear with my creative collaborators, Sphere Swordle, my cinematographer, and Phoebe Darling-Sinner, the production designer, Sharon Long, costume, and Red Miller, makeup. I was like, look, we're not making a movie, and we're not gonna use that word because I don't want to make a movie about this, and that takes you down a different route. It's trying to make a visual document of the characters in the film, and so Sphere and I are always very inspired by photography. And he's a great stills photographer himself. So the work of William Eggleston, the work of Nan Golden, Hannah Starkey, who's a British photographer, Masahisa Fukasi, the Japanese photographer who did Solitude of Ravens, an amazing sort of moment in modern photography. And of course, that in itself then takes you into an entirely different approach to shooting what would mostly feel like verite social realist scenes.
Yeah.
But for us, that wasn't what we wanted to explore with the camera. We wanted sort of very formal, disciplined, and highly structured shots that were deeply photographic. And even the aspect ratio is a reflection of that choice, it being 1:5:1, which is the true 35mm still aspect ratio. And then Sphere had this toy from Panavision that hasn't really been used a lot, called the Panaflasher, which flashes the sensor with different colors depending on what you want. So you can bake the grade in on the day, and we were exploring that every day as well. And I think that, I like that type of cinema that kind of takes a different approach to things, and and dares to explore that. I've always said this with filmmaking, even when I make shorts, if you take the experimental nature out of it, for me, I walk away.
Yeah.
Once it starts feeling like a job or like homework, I'll go and do something else. You've got to be able to try things. And I think on this film, I was very fortunate and encouraged by everyone from the top down to go, full steam ahead with this approach, and people found it really fascinating.
Everyone was so committed. Sorry, I was just saying everyone was so committed. Everybody on set was so committed. It felt like a great environment to be in that respect.
Well, they weren't doing it for the money, I can assure you that, Guy. Hey?
Nobody is here, are they?
No.
Did you ever consider, or was it ever suggested to you doing it as a documentary rather than a narrative film?
Yeah, I'm asked it a lot. I'm asked it a lot, and I knew I didn't want to do it. First of all, I haven't made a documentary. Second of all, I love working with actors. I just really enjoy it. And third of all, with county lines cases, you have to be extremely careful from a safeguarding perspective, because if you're working on active cases and you're putting cameras on that, then that has a huge possible consequences on the child and that family. And I didn't want to play with fire in that way.
Was that also a factor in your decision to cast the film with excellent professional actors rather than street casting, which, is, especially in British indie film, quite often the way people go with films of this scale?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, developing the casting philosophy with Aisha Bywaters was very clear in that she said to me, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I can tell you what I don't want." And I didn't want all of the stuff that you've just said, as great as it can be. I didn't want to go down the like Bruno Dumont road.
Yeah.
And again, I love working with professional actors because you can push them. They're like athletes, and like Conrad and Ashley and Harris, they're like athletes. And if you tell them enough,
yeah,
and if you trigger that curiosity enough, then you can really get a lot out of them.
Yeah.
And that's what excites me.
And Ashley and Conrad, was it, Henry talks about pushing you. Was it a kind of psychological challenge playing these characters? Is it hard to kind of get in and out of that character and let it go?
Yeah, it was a very tough experience, and I pushed to the parameters of my psyche to a greater, to an extent that I'd never done before in my life, and I'd gone to places that I never really want to go again. But I think it was worth it, and the film is there to show that. And something that Henry said to me was that no matter how shit you might be feeling now, how bad it is for you as an actor, these kids, this is what they go through on a daily basis, and they don't get a cut, and they don't get to go home at the end of the day. So you have that responsibility to tell the truth, no matter how hard it might be.
Yeah, I agree with everything Conrad said, and I think that there wasn't a lot of time to go in and out. So I kind of didn't. I would go home, and I wasn't even at home. I was actually staying in my friend's spare bedroom, and I was staying in it, really trying to stay as emotionally connected as I could, so that when I got to work the next morning, it wasn't so far to go. And I started to look more, I was looking like Tony, but I started to look more and more like Tony all the time. Yeah. And then at the end of it, I found it quite difficult to let her go. I went straight into something else, and it felt very jarring to me to be on that other set, which was quite a big budget thing. It was a different experience straight away. I don't know that I necessarily enjoyed shifting so quickly.
That's real whiplash, isn't it?
Yeah.
How long was the shoot for County Lines?
A month.
I mean, that's hell of a contained shoot for such a kind of challenging project, isn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't a full 30 days though, was it, Henry? How many days was it? Was it 30 days?
It wasn't enough. That's all I know. It wasn't enough. But it was I think it was like 21, 22 days, and then we did a couple of days pickup. So, 24 days in total maybe, but these guys worked extremely hard.
Yeah.
I mean, you must remember for Conrad, he was doing his A-levels at the same time.
Wow.
And Ashley was, like she said, she was living like a hermit, and with this type of material, it's probably the only way that you can really do it, and for Conrad, you're kind of just running on empty, But when I was 18, you know, that is the time to run on empty, isn't it? Because you just you do have a bit more malleability and you do have a bit more dynamic. But they worked very hard, and like Ashley said, everyone was in this for the right reasons, and everyone responded to that threshold of responsibility that I set. It wasn't that no one ran away.
Yeah.
They were very courageous and showed a lot of dignity in their work, and I think that shines through in the work as well.
And Henry, could you do another film on this subject set in this world, or is that it now? Or
No, because I think I've said what I've wanted to say, you know, and I've always described this film as a diary entry, and I'm kind of allowing you to read a diary entry. And I don't know, none of you should have read anyone else's diary, but if you do, you get the good, the bad, and the ugly on a subject, and that's what I've tried to do here. I also think from a filmmaking perspective, you have to be able to stretch and try different things. Like I say, you know, otherwise for me, if you're just hammering away at the same old thing, it's not interesting. So, and selfishly, you've got to stay curious and excited.
could you imagine the teens you work with ever seeing the film?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think if some of them have. No, they haven't. No, but I can. Yes, of course. You know, depending on where they are, I don't know where some of them are now. But I would hope, in particular with one case that I worked with, that he would get to see it and at least know that someone had decided to perceive him as not just a complete write-off. You know, I think that would be very meaningful to me.
Is that also what you would want, you know, a general audience member who doesn't know anything about this world beyond what they've maybe read in some newspaper headlines to take away from this film? What would you want them to, how would you want their perception to be changed?
Say if you were walking to the cinema and going to see it and you see a child like Tyler on the corner, maybe as you're walking to the cinema and you see that child, you might think, oh, drug dealer, or that's what's wrong with the world today. I want to see that taken out of our community. Or maybe 91 minutes afterwards, you might see that child again and think twice before you think that.
Yeah.
That's what I want you to feel, you know, that just because a hood is up and someone's presenting as maybe defiantly or defensive, it doesn't mean that there isn't vulnerability there, an innate vulnerability that needs to be safeguarded and supported.
Yeah, Ashley, I want to ask, as a South London girl yourself, has that world changed, do you think, in the time since you were Tyler's age, or did it still feel very familiar to you?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that the world definitely has changed, because youth culture is always changing. So that world is no different. But there definitely were things that were familiar to me. I think I said this to Henry, that when there was a scene where I was in bed, well, many scenes, there are a couple of scenes where I was in bed. One scene in particular, I remember looking up at the ceiling and the light fixtures were exactly the same as the council house that I grew up in. And then the more I looked around, I could see all of those fixtures were the same, the door handles, the cupboards, because they're kind of standard. And it made me feel, nostalgic. It really helped ground me and center me into the flat. It felt familiar.
Yeah. And Conrad, are you planning you've done some acting before this. Is this actually you want to continue in kind of full-time acting?
Yeah, well, like Henry said, at the time I was, a few years ago when we were shooting this, I was doing A-levels. And I've now finished those and took a gap year to explore the world of acting a little bit more. And at the moment, I'm currently a few months into a university course, film studies course, film theory in London. And I'm doing the acting alongside, so I've just been on set for the past month or so, and it's something that I love so much, and definitely I see a future doing this.
And Henry, I want to close by kind of asking you: do you plan to kind of continue the filmmaking youth work kind of parallel that you've been doing for the last few years?
It depends if both worlds will have me, Guy. You know, there's no guarantee that you'll ever get to make another film. So, you know, I threw everything at this in the hope that it would stick. But jury's out as to whether I'm still a filmmaker, isn't it? I mean, you got to get 3 or 4 films deep before you can actually be classified, from my perspective, as a real serious filmmaker.
Well,
and
allow me to interject. You are a filmmaker. You will make another film.
Okay.
Many more films.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you. We'll have a finance chat after this, yeah?
Yes.
So I would love to explore filmmaking more and be able to execute a few more projects that I'm passionate about. But I never want to let go of my youth work, because I really, really value and love working with young people, particularly young people who might not experience such a fairness of opportunity in their lives, because there's a lot of talent out there. And I get a lot from that. It also keeps me very grounded, because, you know, I don't really want to, I don't want to like go full pelt into filmmaking and make commercials and music videos. If I'm honest, it doesn't particularly interest me. I just like to work on my projects and then try and get a few younger filmmakers through the gate who might not otherwise get there, you know?
Well, I think it's clearly given you a depth of human understanding that, you know, is rare in this field. And I think anybody who's been watching would agree that County Lines establishes you very much as a filmmaker. So thank you, Ashley, Conrad, and Henry, all for joining us.
Thank you, Guy.
For this very special Q&A.
Thank you, Guy. That was wonderful.
County Lines will be released in cinemas and on digital on the 4th of December. If you enjoyed this event, please consider donating to the BFI. They're a charity and their venues have been closed due to the lockdown, so your donations will help their work across the film and television industries. Thank you for watching, and good night.